Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Rakneet and today we'll be updating on my Pan That palette for last year. Spoiler, I finished it completely. But along with that, we'll also be discussing about another palette that I finished last year. However, I was working on that one since like 2020, but more on that one later. And before we get started, if you are new here, please consider subscribing to my channel because I make a lot of panning videos. At least I will start making a lot of panning videos again because I've been away from YouTube for quite some time now. And the reason is nothing serious, to be honest. I was just traveling, visiting my family, and then I got sick. Nothing serious again, just got flu and then stomach infection afterwards. So yeah, I'm not wearing makeup a lot, and then I was not in the routine of filming videos. So I kind of like slacked. I was like, okay, maybe I'm just gonna film it tomorrow, maybe day after. And even today I'm not wearing any makeup because I'm kind of like finding it hard to like go back to wearing makeup again. But enough of me ranting. That's not why we are here. We are here to see how our palette looks like now. This is how it looked like last time I updated, and we only had like 2 shades left, and it only took me like a few more uses on both of them to get them all done. This is how it's looking like today. And this is the close-up of the newly finished palette. Doesn't it look so exciting? She is all empty and I can't be any more satisfied with the progress I was able to make on this one. However, it wasn't brand new when I started working on this project. And while I was waiting on the airport for my next flight, I also created this sort of tracker because I had a lot of free time over there and I think it looks really good in my opinion. It looks good in real life than it does on the camera. Now we have all the numbers about how many times I used each shade. I've also tracked them according to the year. So we got numbers for 2020, 2021, and 2022 for the Covergirl palette, and also for the other palette that we will be talking about today. It's the e.l.f. Matte for Matte palette. It wasn't in my Pan That palette project, but I was working on this one consistently throughout 2020, 2021, and 2022, and this is how it's looking like today as well. So that is all empty. Now, if you have been following up my graveyard project pan update, I think I finished the last eyeshadow in that project, but I never gave you guys like numbers for all of those eyeshadows that I finished in the e.l.f. palette. But first, let's go over the numbers for Covergirl palette. If you see me looking down a lot, it's just like I'm referring to my notes in here. Let's move on with the first shade. It's called Loaded. In 2020, I used it a total of 9 times. And in 2021, I used it the total of 42 times. Sorry, no, still this one. I lost a little bit of this eyeshadow while traveling, like it crumbled. But it wasn't a lot of eyeshadow that I lost. Maybe like 7 to 8 uses. And in 2022, I used it a total of 65 times, making the total uses to 116. The next eyeshadow is called Crave, which I used as a setting powder for some reason in 2020, and I don't have like the total uses it took me to like finish it. I only have like 10 uses tracked for this one. I think those uses were before I started using it as a face powder, but yeah, this has been finished for a long time. And the next eyeshadow is called Milk Chocolate. In 2020, I used it a total of 14 times, and in 2021, I used it a total of 56 times, and in 2022, I used it 23 times additionally, and that brings the total uses to 93. I also used this eyeshadow as bronzer a lot of times. I think that's the reason why it went so quickly. And the next shade is called Belgian, and this is the shade that I've used the most out of this palette because this was a dark brown shade that I was using in my eyebrows. Like, it wasn't a conventional brown, it was very ashy brown. Like, it really worked in my eyebrows, you know, like how those eye pencils are called, like not eye pencils, like eyebrow pencils are called ash blonde or ash something. So yeah, that's how that color looked like for me. And I used it 8 times in 2020 and 110 times in 2021 and 139 times in 2022, which brings the total uses to 257 times. Well, that's a lot of uses on that eyeshadow if you compare them with the rest of the palette. And the next shade is called Gourmet. This is also the shade that I lost a little bit along with Loaded when I was traveling. However, I used it 9 times in 2020 and 35 times in 2021 and 22 times in 2022, and the total uses on this is 66. It was also very crumbly shade, so that's why I was using like a lot when I was actually using it on my eyelids. Next shade is called Lit. I used it 4 times in 2020, used it 9 times in 2021 and 55 times in 2022. So this is the shade that kind of looked like bruise on my skin, so I really did not use it on my eyes that much. I scraped it off, mixed some other eyeshadow in here and just made a bronzer out of this and used it that way. The next eyeshadow is called Chocolate Shake, which was probably my favorite eyeshadow out of these. And I reached for this eyeshadow 35 times in 2020, 37 times in 2021, and 69 times in 2022, which brings the total to 141 uses. I was using it with my finger a lot, so I was using it evenly, and I got pan on this eyeshadow after 80 uses. And the last shade in here is called Cocoa, which I used 23 times in 2020, 20 times in 2021, and 118 times in 2022, which brings the total to 161 uses. I would say this was a successful pan that palette, as I was able to like finish all of the shades in here, especially because I started like in May, but I knew that the formula in here is not that hard pressed. All of the eyeshadows are soft, and I was hoping to get done with the eyeshadows like before the end of last year. That's everything we have for this little guy right here. The packaging on this one is not broken, so I'm not sure if I want to discard it or I want to display it somewhere in my background. I haven't decided anything. Danny displays her empty palettes in her background on her videos, and I am kind of thinking if I want to do the same thing because that would be fun. However, I discarded like a lot of empty palettes because I did finish a bunch of palettes in the past. So yeah, we'll see how it goes. Now let's move on to the e.l.f. palette. This is the very original e.l.f. Matte for Matte palette. I had it since 2017. Oh, not 2017, 2016. That makes it the oldest palette I currently have in my collection. I mean, I just have the packaging. I don't have the product anymore, but yeah. So this is a palette that I mostly used in Frankening stuff. However, I did not use all of the eyeshadows to Franken anything, let's say any face product. So we'll go over that as well. Starting with the very first shade, I used it 67 times in 2020 and I finished it in that particular year. And the next shade was very light, sort of pinkish shade that really did not show up in my crease. It was like way too light for me. So I used it 22 times in 2020 and then I scraped it off and just frankened it to make some sort of blush, I guess. And the next shade was also very light for me. It was a very light brown sort of shade. I also frankened that and used it as a bronzer. Oh, it was this one. And the next shade was a little bit of deeper shade of pink, but still not deep enough for my preference. And I used it in a Franken blush as well, after using it 23 times in 2020. And the next shade was a really nice warm crease shade, and I used it as an eyeshadow. And in 2020, I used it a total of 55 times. And in 2021, I used it 93 times, which brings the total to 148. And I finished it in 2021. So the next shade was a really nice brown shade, and I used it in my crease and sometimes probably in my eyebrows as well. And I used it 13 times in 2020, 106 times in 2021, and it took me 119 uses to get it done. The next shade was a grayish brown sort of shade, and I mostly used it in my eyebrows as well as on in my crease. I think I also used some of it in my Franken bronzer, because I used it 6 times in 2020, and then I used it 85 times in 2021, and it took me like 91 uses to get it done, because these eyeshadows are firmly pressed. Like, they're not super hard pressed, but they are like very firm. So that's the only explanation for getting it done in 91 uses. I must have used it in my Franken bronzer. Moving on to the next shade, it was a nice burgundy brown shade, and I really enjoyed it. So I used it 84 times in 2020. I used it 24 times in 2021, and then it was gone. So it took me 108 uses to get this whole thing done. And moving on to the next shade, it was a light gray shade. This was very firmly pressed. I remember I couldn't get like any product on my brush, so what I did, I repressed it into the same pan and I used it that way. So I used it 18 times in 2020, I used it 71 times in 2021, and I used it additional 72 times in 2022. That brings the total to 161 uses. So even after repressing, it took 161 uses for me to finish this thing off. And the last shade was a dark gray shade, which took the most number of uses to get done. And I used it 9 times in 2020. I used it 204 times in 2021. And I used it 4 times in 2022. And then it was done. And the total uses on the dark gray shade are 217. So that is the quick recap of e.l.f. Matte for Matte palette. Overall, I'm really happy with getting them all done and moving them out of my collection. I even have this little sponge applicator that came with this palette, so it's going back in there. And that's a wrap for this video. Thank you so much guys for sticking with me until the end. I hope you have a wonderful day or night depending on when you're watching my video. I'll see you in my next one. Until then, take care. Bye.